Too rainy and windy outside to paint, so I thought I would go over something I've been wanting to talk about for a bit, which is the top 10 things you should think about before buying a sailboat. Doesn't mean it's the only 10 things, just means these are the 10 things that we're suggesting you think about. So, let's get into it. Number 1, there's nothing more expensive than a cheap boat. And I know, if you go online and you look for sailboats, you can find them from anywhere from free. And you're like, how could buying a free sailboat not be the cheapest option? And I have a scientific experiment for you. Go, get in your car, drive to West Marine, walk around, and see how much you think it would cost to put together a sailboat out of spare parts at West Marine. Second only to airplanes, boat parts are horrendously expensive. If you end up having to replace everything on a boat, you could very possibly buy a completely rigged out boat with the work already done twice over. You really need to think about this, and especially if you're not willing to do your own work on your boat, nothing is more expensive than a cheap boat. Number 2, learn to work on your boat. To me, this is fundamental. If for no other reason than the fact that when you are out sailing, obviously, there will not always be someone there that you can pay to work on your boat. It also gives you a deeper understanding of your boat's particular flaws, vulnerabilities, and strengths. You might end up understanding that you have a much better boat than you thought you had, more capable of doing some other things if you have laid your hands on it. Not to mention the fact that this is a very expensive thing to have done. Boat mechanics charge a premium, and they're worth a premium. If you only have a small amount of money, there's certain things that you probably won't be able to do, but you should keep that to a minimum. And if going online and learning, or even looking over the shoulder unobtrusively of somebody working on your boat so that maybe you pay to do it once, but that you know how to do it the next time it needs to be done, this is invaluable, and this should be part of your boating routine. Number 3, right size your boat. So there is a tendency of people to get bigger boats than they might need. Conversely, there might be a tendency of people to get smaller boats than they need because they're looking at maybe cost constraints. So you need to think about how you're using this boat. Is this a day sailor that you might use once every few months? Well, then maybe a trailerable sailboat is the right answer for you. Is this something you're going to be living on continually? Well, then that 22, 23 foot Catalina might not be the answer because you can't even stand up inside it. You need to think about how you want to use that boat, and not just how, but how fundamentally can you use that boat? How often are you going to be in it? Think about this, because if you choose to be in a marina, you're going to pay for every foot of length you have. And so it's a simple multiplication problem about how much more it's going to cost you for how much more boat. Nobody has ever needed several storage rooms on a boat. If you do, then you're doing it wrong. So think about this. Number 4, choose your electronics carefully. Maybe almost more than any other part on a boat, the electronics are, number 1, if you're buying a used boat, probably outdated unless someone has just done it, because the electronics are changing constantly now. And it can get very expensive very quickly. You can end up spending more in electronics than you spent on the boat. And I know you're thinking that's not a real thing. It's a real thing. You can easily spend more electronics than you spend on the boat. There are a lot of workarounds these days, though. I'll do a whole video later on how I did a setup, but I did a Raspberry Pi computer monitor GPS setup for about $300 that includes AIS, GPS navigation, OpenCPN, chart plotter. It includes most of the software that you will buy in a $10,000 system for about $300, and I didn't get some special deal on it. You could do it too. It takes a little bit of research, some time to put it together. Away from that, Navionics software that you can have on your phone or a tablet, fantastic options. And anymore, it's nice to have redundancy. But before you spend $10,000 on a brand new Garmin chart plotter system, think about how you're going to use it. Think about what is the return on your investment. Number 5, headroom is critical for living. Now, I know there's a lot of people who probably won't talk about this, but I'm going to, because my first boat was a 23-foot Starwind. Was a Hirschoff design, but it's essentially more or less the same boat as like a 22-foot Catalina. These are great boats. They're easy to sail. There's thousands of them out there. They're cheap, and they're fantastic for that. There is zero headroom in it if you are 6 feet tall. I could hardly get above a crouch. It was horribly uncomfortable, and even staying the night on it I found to be not a pleasurable experience. So if you are going to do a live aboard boat, you need to give real consideration to headroom, and not just when you're looking at the boat for 5 minutes, but think about living on that boat for long term. Think about being on that boat during a torrential downpour rainstorm. Headroom is important. Number 6, monohull versus cat. The battle rages, and I'll sit here while you all pick sides. Okay, I've owned one of each. I've owned a monohull, and we now own a cat. And I will say there are advantages and disadvantages to both boats, and there's no end of research that you can find out there. Some people will tell you that cats are more comfortable. Some people will tell you cats are less comfortable. Some people will tell you that you can get a lot more monohull for the money, which I tend to agree with. There's a lot to it. And if you don't know which way you want to go, the only way that I see that you can really sort that is by sailing in one of each. So if you're going to spend money, you only have the money to buy one or the other. See if you can't get a day sail class or just a sailing experience on one versus the other in about the size that your budget would allow you to get, because they are different. Our cat is much bigger than our mono was, which is kind of the opposite that most people have, but the cat has some interesting characteristics, especially on confused seas, of how it moves underfoot. And the mono, of course, you know, in a decent breeze, you're heeled over quite a ways. It's not as straightforward that one is better than the other. You need to really think about how you're going to use that boat before you make a decision one way or the other. And like I said, you can find every opinion stated in all caps all over the internet, so check it out. Number 7, inboard versus outboard. So it's worth at least having a conversation about this. Again, traditional sailboat purists, when you think of an old sailboat, you're thinking of a Perkins, a Universal diesel, inboard, putting away, driving the boat forward. The other option, of course, and for smaller sailboats, is to have an outboard on the back of the boat. I like the outboard. The reason that I do is because it's easier to change. Obviously, you can take an outboard off. It's completely mostly self-contained. If something goes wrong with it, if it completely blows out, it can be changed in a lot less time than you could ever dream of changing a diesel inboard. But for me, the biggest thing is that I can't smell it. We looked at a lot of boats before we bought this one, and with the exception of one, every one of those boats I could smell old diesel. So the oil dripping off of the crankcase, the fuel somewhere in there, I could smell it inside the boat. For me, motion sickness accompanied with strong smells of petroleum are a bad trigger for me to be sick and not feel good. So for me, it was almost a deal breaker to have an inboard motor. Now if I'd found one that was in extremely good service, of course, and maybe I could have made those boats we looked at, put them in good service. But I think it's at least worth considering that there are two options here, and if you've got a boat that has an old seized diesel inboard, might be worth considering moving to an outboard. Anyway. Number 8, evaluating your rigging. Sailboats have two types of rigging, standing rigging and running rigging. Your standing rigging is typically steel braided cables that hold the mast up from various different angles. The running rigging are the rope lines that raise and lower the sails, tighten, and allow you different points of sail that way. How do you know whether they are in good shape or not? Well, with the standing rigging, so these are the steel cables, if you're seeing rust, if you're seeing corrosion, if you are seeing any type of fraying or broken portion of the cable, probably needs to go. Insurance, some of them will ask if your standing rigging is more than 10 years old that you have it replaced. It's not free, so first you have to be somewhere that they can get the mast off of the boat. They have to lay the mast down, they have to measure new cables, they have to get the new cables, secure them, bring them back on. Ours was about $3,000 for our 30-foot catamaran. Your running rigging, so these you can, again, you're looking for fray, how old are these? Remember that some of these ropes can take a tremendous amount of force, and if you break one under sail, it can be somewhat catastrophic. And again, you're trying to try lines to lines to be able to keep your mainsail up. So although it is not free to change these out, really, if you're questioning it and you don't have someone to tell you that they are in good shape, might be worth changing them out. Our running rigging cost about $1,700 to have it replaced on our 30-foot cat, which is sloop rigged. Okay, number 9, you may need a survey. If you don't know a lot about sailboats and you don't feel comfortable deciding whether or not what you're buying is a good sailboat, you might need a survey. Now, surveys end up being somewhere between, I'm going to say at the very, very low side, $300 to maybe $1,000, especially if you have to be pulled out of the water because you want to inspect the underside of the boat for blistering, which is water intrusion into the fiberglass. Depending on what you need looked at on the boat, like I say, they can be more or less expensive in the water, pulled out of the water. And to me, this is how I have evaluated whether or not I needed a survey. I didn't have a survey on either boat that I bought. The first one was in the water, but I only paid $1,000 for the boat. So to pay $500 for a survey for a boat that I only paid $1,000 for, I figured that if I sailed it for 2 afternoons and then, it ended up at the bottom of the ocean, I still was maybe better off than gambling $500 to have them tell me that it's probably a piece of crap boat. The real question on a survey is, with how much you're spending on the sailboat, can you afford to lose it? So I look at this kind of like investing in the stock market. If you don't have that much money to lose, and by that I mean the entire purchase amount of the boat, then you probably should get a survey, because it's really the only way to know for sure, unless you have the skills to survey a boat, in which case you're probably not watching this video. Number 10, learning to sail. This might be the most frequent question that we get. Well, sure, I can buy a sailboat, but how do I learn to sail? There are a lot of options out there. Of course, the American Sailing Association has classes out there, usually available within a couple of hours of almost any location in the United States. Anywhere that there's a boat where people are out there sailing, usually there's somebody that's willing to teach you to sail. The classes can be a little pricey, so you can spend, a couple $100s for sort of an intro to sailing class. You can bundle a few of them together and live aboard for 2 or 3 days. Like I say, it gets more expensive the more you do it. Or you could take that money, join a sailing club and, you know, go out there, get on a sunfish, talk with some of the members, have them give you some points, tip it over a few times. That's how we started, was at the Titusville Sailing Club on a little sunfish. And I feel that the lessons that I learned there, not only, you know, in a book, but also, you know, feeling how the boat moved in that sail, feeling how when I adjusted how deep the keel was inside there, of how it changed the boat, that has affected how I sail larger boats. And what is true for a small boat is, in a lot of ways, is true for a larger boat. And there's really nothing that replaces hands-on, which of course is your third option, which is just buy the damn sailboat. Take it out. If you've got a friend that sails, buy a 6-pack, save it for after you've learned to sail. Take your friend out there and have him show you some points, or watch YouTube videos and take the boat out and put the sail up. Be ready to take it down. If you can, in the marina, get the sail up and down in a reasonable amount of time, go out on a day when the wind is blowing really no more than about 10 knots, just a nice easy breeze. Have read a couple of books on sailing. This is how all the best sailors learn, is by doing. If you've got somebody who can teach you, fantastic. Don't use that, if you don't have someone, as an excuse not to learn to sail. So take the class, ask a buddy, or just go out there and do it yourself. You're going to make some mistakes. Don't hurt yourself. Be relatively safe. Again, you want to know what the weather forecast is, but you can do it. I know you can do it. I did it, and I'm an idiot. Just ask anybody. Here's to sailing, and we'll see you on the water.